if the premise of an argument is false, then the facts that are quoted to back up that argument are false themselves. When you have an opinion, it is either true or it's not. If it's not, then like a house of cards, the facts do not back you up. Before I get into my future prediction, based upon my historical, psychological, and observations, I will first state the premise, and then I will give you some reasons why I think this premise is false. America is systemically racist. Now, what you got to understand is, let me explain that. You hear that term so many times, you probably don't really even know what that means. Systemically or systematically, you hear those terms intertwined, they both mean the same thing. It means that our entire society, our government, our financial system, corporate America, the legal system, all of it only benefits white people. It does not benefit anybody else. They use this to justify being racist against white people, especially white men, and destroying the foundations of Western civilization. That's the whole point. That's what that means, though. In a country with 330 million people, of course there's going to be ignorant, racist assholes out there. But just because you know a person who is racist, a group who is racist, or you have instances of racism, does not mean the entire society is based upon racism. Now that I have explained the premise, here are a few reasons why I think that is a false premise. Number one, if America, today, I'm not talking about in the 1950s and 60s, it was systemically racist. I'm talking about America in 2021. If America is systemically or systematically racist, then how come our immigration laws are less enforced and are less strict than Canada's and Mexico's, for example? If you get caught in Mexico overstaying your visa, you can expect possibly a major fine or even months of hard labor, even years. If you want to migrate to Canada and gain Canadian citizenship, they have a merit-based system. They have a few stipulations that you must abide by. One of those being, you must have enough income to provide for yourself. You cannot live off taxpayer expense. Number two, you must have some sort of skills to provide value to society. I thought it was very comical when celebrities like Miley Cyrus were bitching when Trump was proposing a merit-based immigration system. The way they wanted to protest that was to move to Canada. Now, you can disagree with that, but if your solution is to migrate to a country because they have a merit-based immigration system, and away from a country because they want to do the same thing because that country is racist, then you don't really believe in equality, or you want to move to a racist country. Number two, I had to keep reaffirming this so you understand the premise. If America is systemically racist, then how come a large percentage of the majority group, voted for an African American president? Think about it. White people make up roughly somewhere in the ballpark of 70% of the population. If white people really were racist, then why would they have voted in a black president? to rule over the system. Doesn't make any sense. Number 3, if America is systemically racist, then how come it is the most diverse country in the history of the world based upon population? African Americans make up 13% of the population. White people make up 70%. Latinos are moving up. The point I'm making, though, is no country in the history of the world, and even today, is as diverse. No country takes in as many refugees. No country grants as many people as asylum. No other country gives legal immigrants pathways here. Number 4, if America is systemically racist, why do people risk their lives, jump into boats, risk getting sex trafficked by coyotes, which the media, of course, doesn't know about, because that's racist, even though that's been a thing for a long time? Why do they risk all that? Risk getting detained, risk getting put in cages, risk all that to go into a country where the system is rigged against them. Number 5. This will be the last one. I could name tons of them. It's such bullshit. It's so false. You can basically make all these arguments in your sleep if you actually are wanting to know the truth. You don't just regurgitate what the media tells you. Last but not least, if America is systemically racist, how come, according to the US Census, Indians and East Asians are the highest earning income groups? Indians and East Asians on average make more than Caucasians. Why is it that people who come from Nigeria typically make more than Caucasians if a country is systemically racist? Meaning the entire system is rigged against them, yet somehow they were able to make it higher than white people. It just doesn't make sense. Now, what is happening right now? What you are seeing happen is based upon history, the government, minority groups, and others, and these white people that are going along with it. Here's another thing. White people are over 70% of the population, all right? The only reason you can have movements like Black Lives Matter, the only reason you can have all this is because other white people are going along with it. If they weren't going along with it, then you would not have a black president, ever. You would not have BLM as a movement. I mean, a damn Caucasian Jew funds that shit. It's not even funded by real black people. But again, back to the main argument. I just get pissed off when people are so damn retarded when you have the internet with all this information. Right now, you are seeing racism against white people, especially white men, because of history. And they don't know the real history. They don't know that it was the British Empire that ended slavery and that Muslim countries to this day still have slaves. The Ottoman Empire enslaved other Africans, but they didn't do it anymore because the British Empire stopped it. But they don't know that. They're stupid. They don't understand that. It's white people bad. So because of the past, we are now trying to destroy white people, destroy the West. One of the ways they're doing that is massive immigration. The other way they're doing that is by diversity quotas. You have to hire a certain amount of transgender, a certain amount of this, a certain amount of that. Every commercial you see now is politically correct. They go out of their way not to show a white person when the majority of the population is white. If you go to an African country, if you go to China, you go to Japan, in their commercials, they are trying to advertise to the majority of the population. That's why you have the majority of the population on the commercials. But they're going out of their way not to have white people in the commercials to show that they're woke, to show that they're virtuous. What is going to be the future based upon this? The future is going to be similar to Rwanda. Not in that same extreme capacity, Basically, in Rwanda, you have the Hutus and the Tutsis. For a long time, the Tutsis were the minority in the country. They rolled over the Hutus. Belgium took over that colony after World War I from Germany. Germany, for a period of time, owned a lot of East Africa as colonies. When Belgium took over, they really promoted the Tutsis as the leaders of Rwanda. As a result, they started going along with the eugenics movements in America and Europe. They started measuring the skulls of the Hutus and the Tutsis. They came to the conclusion that the Tutsis had larger skulls, therefore, they were more intelligent than the Tutsis. Rather, the Tutsis were more intelligent than the Hutus. But the only difference really between the tribes is that the Tutsis were typically dairy farmers, so they were taller and darker. They tried to say they had Caucasian ancestry because they had larger brains. Sorry, I lost my train of thought. This is a lot of information I'm dispelling at you. The Hutus were a little bit shorter simply because they ate a lot of meat and they were farmers, but they didn't have access to cows. Tensions arose. They ended up giving people cards where they had to say if they were a Hutu or a Tutsi. If people owned 10 or more cows, they were considered a Tutsi, and the minority rolled over the majority. But then eventually, after a lot of tensions, Belgium ended up getting rid of their control. They let the people vote in a referendum. In that referendum, of course, the majority, which were the Hutus, ended up voting the Hutus in power. The Tutsis were pissed. You had a lot of tension, a lot of fighting. Eventually, a lot of the Tutsis were dispelled into Uganda and other countries because of the past. You see, when you bring up the past to justify the present, it just causes a lot of shit, especially when you have divisions. A lot of those people from Uganda ended up taking over that country, and they created a military. That military ended up invading Rwanda. They wanted to go into Rwanda and say, okay, you displaced us Tutsis for what we did in the past. We're going to get back at you. They ended up fighting for 3 years, then they had a ceasefire. But that ceasefire didn't work. Eventually, the elected president of Rwanda and another country that was near Rwanda, the name escapes me, it's been a while since I've read this stuff, a couple years ago, ended up going in a plane. That plane got shot down. After that plane got shot down, and remember, these were Hutus. You had the local military and a lot of civilians go after the Tutsis and moderates. You had massive genocide. The United Nations had a peace force in there, but they were underfunded and they left. United Nations is a piece of shit, but that's another story for another day. Basically, you had massive genocide of women, children, anybody who was a Tutsi. It is estimated that anywhere from 500,000 to even, in some cases, 800,000 of the Tutsis were killed. You see, that's what happens when you bring up the past. When you blame other people for things they didn't even do because of the past. It ends up causing strife. It ends up causing arguments. It ends up causing conflicts. Eventually, you ended up having Paul Kagame, who is the current president of Rwanda, the RFA, the Royal Free Army, ended up taking over the country and stopping a lot of the genocide. Now Rwanda is one of the fastest growing countries. It averages 8% GDP, and it's the first country in Africa to produce a mobile phone. Basically, though, the point I'm making is it resetted, and now the Tutsis are barely 1% of the population because of massive genocide by the Hutus. That's what ends up happening when you have massive divisions and strife. So there's going to be some sort of conflict in the future. I don't think it's going to be to that degree. I don't think it's going to be that visceral or that vivid. I think what's going to end up happening is a reverse. You see, progressivism is really regressivism. Now you have African Americans wanting their own dorm rooms, but Martin Luther King had those set-ins because he wanted segregation to end. Now they're segregating themselves. Comical how they want that, right? A portion of them, not the majority. I'm just talking about a small portion of morons. Average people aren't bad. They're just living their lives, you know. But what's going to end up happening is white people are going to be the minority, and they're going to be the ones that are discriminated against. They're going to be taught in school how bad white people are, how oppressive white people are, how bad and terrible, and every atrocity in history is based upon evil white man, and they have to apologize for being white. If they don't apologize because they're so bad and they're evil, then they will be discriminated against. That's what ends up happening when you teach that narrative. And it's also damaging to African Americans because if you believe your country is all against you, then you're not going to succeed. You're not going to take advantage of the opportunities that present themselves to you. And that's my issue. People don't want to read. People don't want to learn history. They don't want to learn about basic facts. Then they want to call you a racist when you are informed. You can disagree with me all you want, but at least come up with an argument that is coherent.